Okay, I promised I would tell you why I have a broken wing, and I want to do this so that even the people out there in YouTube land can know the story. It's not. It's really not that great of a story, but I returned home from Las Vegas Monday night, this past Monday night, and Tuesday morning early, I was sitting in my office. I didn't have my hearing aids in, so I don't hear things from the back of me. If they're not plugged in, I don't hear anything behind me. And I can barely hear anything in front of me, and I usually read people's lips. So I was sitting in my office chair, and I had this elbow. My chair's got arms on it, so this elbow was sitting on the arm of the chair, and my hand was just kind of draped out like this. I don't know why I was sitting like that, but I was over on this side, okay? And I was looking out this way with my arm on this side when those of you that know Asia are 400-pound Labrador puppy, or at least it feels like 400 pounds when it jumps on you. She'd gotten up that morning, and Wendy opened the door to let her out, knowing that I was up, and I didn't hear her coming. And she decided she wanted to jump in my lap. Well, when she went to jump up in my lap from this direction, she landed right on my arm and my hand and my wrist, and it hyperextended my elbow, my wrist, and all of my fingers. So we went to the doctor. The doctor took x-rays at least as well as they could. You know, if you've ever had anything like this, you know how what's those awkward positions that they want you to get into. You're already in pain, and they want you to end up in some. Well, there were some of them I couldn't do, so they got some of the X-rays, but there were some they weren't able to. They just couldn't get them without me. I don't know, laying on the table sideways or something, but anyway, they couldn't find any fractures, so that's good. But you can't see any soft tissue damage with X-rays. So we're trying to get an MRI done. The elbow is now it's probably 90% back. I can bend my arm now. At first I couldn't bend it at all. Now I can probably go from where it is here, I can probably get it to there. So that's 1,000% improvement from only being able to do this a few days ago. But my hand is, it just not, now you could put a tennis ball in my hand and I would just drop it. I could try to hold it and it'd just fall out. I don't have enough dexterity. I was talking to Mike, it's embarrassing when you're in your 70s and you have to have your wife dress you, when you can't button a button or put on your socks, or, you know, it's amazing. Try this sometime. If you're right-handed, stick your right hand in your pocket and live for a week without your right hand, and make a list of things that you never had any idea in the world that you had to use your right hand for. So any of you that have sent me an email or a text and received a response from it, you owe my wife an apology, because I can't type. I got this, and it's just not working. So hopefully that's what happened. So now I don't have to tell the story a whole bunch of times. Be careful with energetic Labradors. And those of you that know my energetic Labrador will will understand that I mean, she didn't mean anything by it, but she got to me. Okay. That said, since I can't type, that means I can't type a new outline, right? So that was a problem that I had to go through this week. What am I going to preach? I have ideas. I've got rough scribblings here that I want to work, but I can't type it out. So we're going to go back to one of the essential Bible doctrine studies, and we're going to take a look at the one on believer's duty. Well, I don't know. I have no idea when the last time I preached this sermon was. 10 years ago, maybe, something like that. It's been a while, but the doctrine is still sound. And you know, I was asked a question in Las Vegas by one of our visitors about how long it takes to put a sermon together. And I told him, well, it's a different process now. The process I go through is completely different than it was when I started. When I first started, I was spending all my time trying to find the right verses to fit and trying to fit it all together like that. I spend a great deal of time now trying to better teach something so that people can understand it. What kind of example can I use here? How can I say this better or differently, or, you know, because one of the things that a pastor has the advantage of that the other people in the room don't have is that I can see when your eyes glass over. I can tell when you didn't get it. I can tell when and that's a lot of what goes on the fly up here, because I'll be looking around the room and I'll notice that I'll make a point and you can see the inquisitive look on somebody's face that, well, I'm going to have to take another shot at this. And so I spend a lot of time now trying to come up with all of those other different avenues to try to get the message across more. So how long does it take? It still takes the same amount of time. It's just a different set of a different skill set than I had to use almost 40 years ago when I started this stuff. Back then, I remember it would take me 3 weeks to put a sermon together. I remember asking Pastor Gerald just before I came down here, how in the world am I going to do this every week? I mean, I'll spend a month putting one Sunday sermon. How do I fit all? I don't have that much time. How do I do that? And his answer was, well, don't worry about it. You'll figure it out. God doesn't call incompetent men. You'll be able to work it out somehow. So far, and thank God, I've been able to do it. Okay, so there I killed a whole bunch of time without ever even starting the sermon. See? Okay, believer's duty. And I've changed the first little bit of this from the phrasing in it. And I think you'll understand why. If you remember this sermon, you'll understand why I changed this. And it's exactly the opposite of what most churches teach. Okay? Redemption is evidenced by service to the Redeemer. Most churches teach that redemption is based on service to the Redeemer, but it's not. It's evidenced by service to the Redeemer. I want you to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 19 and 20. 1 Corinthians 6, verses 19 and 20. What? Know ye not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, which is in you, which ye have of God, and ye are not your own. For ye are bought with a price. Therefore, since you're bought with a price, since that part is already a fait accompli, since the redemption has already taken place, therefore, glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. Now, I'm going to say something that may sound a little odd, but it's really the truth. The service that you do to the Redeemer, since it doesn't create the redemption, it's merely the evidence of it. Your service to the Redeemer shows the Redeemer what you believe your redemption is worth. What kind of value you put on the price that was paid to redeem your soul. The amount of service that you do for the Redeemer speaks to the Redeemer. It also speaks to the rest of the world, because believe it or not, folks watch you. They find out you're a Christian. They don't care about what you have to say. They want to see how you walk. They want to see how you live your life. Is this really, because anybody can say the stuff, but is it really important to them? Does it really matter to them? And that's one of the things that we have to be cognizant of that and pay attention to that. That's because I can tell you something. You have an adversary out there, and that adversary probably knows you almost as well as you know yourself. And that adversary looks for any little crack in the armor. If he can find any little crack in that armor, he is going to pound on that crack until it splits wide open. It is his desire to get you to quit rather than continue. And he will use anything within his power to do it. Parents, watch out. He'll use your kids against you. If you got family members, watch out. He will use them against you, and you won't even see it coming. If he can find a crack in the armor, he will use it. And then if your service drops off as a result, what's the message that you're sending to the Redeemer? How valuable was the redemption? Do I really need you to answer my prayers? When I'm having struggles and I go to you and yet I haven't done anything for you in a month and a half. You know, there was a time when Jesus, I think it was when he was having dinner with a Pharisee, and it was on the occasion, it's over in Luke, it was the occasion when the woman was washing his feet with her tears and drying his feet with the hairs of her head. And one of the things that Jesus said to the Pharisee was he gave one of his analogies of, you know, let's say hypothetically, I'm going to put it in my own words here, this isn't the Bible, but hypothetically, you got somebody that owes you $500,000 and you got somebody that owes you $50, and neither of them can pay the debt. And so you just frankly or freely forgive both of them. Which one of those people is going to love you the most? And the Pharisee said, well, obviously the one to whom the most was forgiven. And that was the point that Christ was trying to make. If you realize the price that was paid for the sins that you committed, you're on the $500,000 end, folks, not the $50. And so what you do in service to God shows the Redeemer how much you're appreciative of it and how much you love him. And if you don't think it was worth much, well, then your service to him is going to be less. And if you think it was worth the world, then your service to him is going to be the world. Look at Luke chapter 12. And this is an important part that we're going to get into this next section also. Verse 47 of Luke chapter 12. And that servant which knew his Lord's will, and prepared not himself, neither did according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes. If you know God wants you to do something and you just decide, yeah, I ain't going to do it, well, get ready. You're going to be beaten with many stripes. And verse 48, but he that knew not and did commit things worthy of stripes shall be beaten with few stripes. Ignorance is no excuse, folks. You should have known better. You should have known. Because there's something about a child of God that we sometimes forget about. God put his laws in your heart. He put them in your spirit. You know they're there. You know when you cross the line. Whether you've got book, chapter, and verse to prove it or not, you know in your heart that you're not doing what you ought to be doing. Even if you don't have book, chapter, and verse. And you know when you are doing what you should be doing. So that you may not know the verse, but you commit it anyway, get ready. You'll be beaten with few stripes. For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall much be required. And to whom men have committed much, of him will they ask the more. Now, I want to show you 3 facts about all born-again people. 3 facts about all born-again people. Oh, I went too far. The first one is going to be found over in Acts chapter 2 and verse 37. Acts chapter 2 and verse 37. Now when they heard this is right after Peter had been preaching. When they heard this, they were pricked in their heart and said unto Peter and to the rest of the apostles, Men and brethren, what shall we do? All born again people feel a kinship for those that love God and want to serve God, all of them. Every single one of them. If you're born again, you see, this is one of the things that a lot of people get confused on. They think that somebody, for some reason, somebody wanders into a church and hears a message and the message convicts them, and so then they press into service. Folks, the reason they're in the church to start with is because they're born again. Born again people try to find God. They try to find him any way they can, and a lot of the times when they're looking, they end up going down some of the wrong paths. We've discussed some of the silly paths that we've gone down over the years. But you're searching for him. You feel that drive to find God. Men and brethren, what shall we do? And then we find out what, in the next verses, what it was that they were to do. They were baptized, they became members of the church, they pressed into the kingdom. I want you to look also at 1 John chapter 3 and verse 14. Back in the little Johns, way back in the back. 1 John chapter 3 and verse 14. We know that we have passed from death unto life because we love the brethren. He that loveth not his brother abideth in death. Now, let me clarify something for you here real quick, because you can love your brother without liking him very much. I don't know if you know that or not, but you can. This is not some sort of a huggy-feely, emotional type of love. The love of God is defined as keeping his commandments. You keep the commandments towards your brethren and you show them that you love them. That is the love under consideration here. So, don't lie to your brethren, don't cheat them, don't steal from them. And that's the love under consideration. It's not this modern day emotional, huggy-feely kind of love thing that everybody gets involved in and thinks it is. That's not what it is at all. The love of God is to keep the commandments towards your brethren. You do that towards your brethren and you show that you loved them. Okay? It's just a side note. But you have a desire, a born-again person has a desire to treat their brethren that way and to not take advantage of them and to not do things that would harm them. So they have that desire. Another desire that they have, now we already looked at Acts chapter 2 and verse 37, and this is that desire to serve God. Let's look at another one though, 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Excuse me. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 14 and 15. For the love of Christ constraineth us. To constrain means to compel by physical, moral, or circumstantial force. It translates a Greek word that means to hold something together so that it doesn't fall apart but hangs together. The love of God constrains us, okay? The love of Christ constraineth us because we thus judge that if one died for all, then all were dead, and that he died for all, that they which live should not henceforth live unto themselves, but unto him which died for them and rose again. You see, there's that desire to serve God. If you're born again, that's within your breast. There's nothing you can, it's there. And you have, until you dilute it to the point that it's not there anymore, by ignoring it and not doing what you should do, it will be there. And you will feel this need to serve God, if you will. It's like eating. I used to use this analogy when it came to preaching for all those years that I was studying and didn't know whether or not I had to call a preacher or not. I've told people, you know, if I didn't have a church, well, there's squirrels in the backyard. I'll go preach to them. I couldn't not do it. I couldn't not preach. I had to. It constrained me. And that was one of the things, you know, there's times when I've made the statement that what I'm looking for to train is I'm looking for me. If I find another one of me, well then, and I know what that is. I know what that's like. I know what that feeling is like. And that was one of the things that Conrad said, yeah, that's one, that's it. That's one of them. That's one of them. You can't not do it. So you sit there with 400 sermons that you put together and no place to preach them. So you preach them to the dogs. You preach them to the birds in the sky, because you're constrained to do. Well, that same type of constraint is within the breast of every born-again child of God. They have that desire. And that's something that doesn't come from them deciding that. That comes from God touching them and putting it in them. In that passage in Philippians, it is God that worketh in you to work things out. He put it in there. So you didn't do anything to get it, but you got it. And now you've got the desire to go find the truth and figure out, why do I feel this way? And most people wander into the wrong church and hear the wrong message and like it and join it and stay there the rest of their lives. And that's where most of them tend to wind up. Okay, there's something else that happens to all born-again people. Turn to Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12, beginning at verse 5. And ye have forgotten the exhortation which speaketh unto you as unto children. My son, despise not thou the chastening of the Lord, nor faint when thou art rebuked of him. For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth every son whom he receiveth. If ye endure chastening, God dealeth with you as sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not? But if ye be without chastisement, whereof all are partakers, then are ye bastards and not sons. Furthermore, we've had fathers of our flesh which corrected us, and we gave them reverence. Shall we not much rather be in subjection unto the Father of spirits and live? For they verily for a few days chastened us after their own pleasure, but he for our profit, that we might be partakers of his holiness. Now no chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby. You know, I can't speak for this day and age, because we're in a day and age where people don't believe in chastening their children anymore. In my day and age, all I had to hear was the word Bill in my mother's voice, in that certain tone, and I knew it was not gonna be pretty. And so our parents would chasten us, to make us better, to teach us, and to keep peace in the family sometimes. God only does it for our benefit. He's not doing it for his, he's doing it for ours. And all of God's children are chastened. If you get out of line, now not everything that befalls you is a chastening of God, okay? Sometimes we go through things because we were just dumb. I don't think this was chastisement. I think this was me not paying attention when the dog decided to jump on me, okay? But we do go through chastisement. And so anytime something bad seems to happen, it's time to at least take a look. Do I have some sort of unconfessed sin out there that I need to deal with? Is there something that I'm doing that I ought not be doing, or is there something that I ought to be doing that I'm not? Is there a reason for me to go through? Could this be chastisement? And it might be. Or it might just be because you were dumb and not paying attention, right? It's hard to say. But all of God's children do receive chastisement. Now, how does God deal with people relative to how much they know? Turn over to Romans chapter 2. Verses 14 and 15. I'm going to change this. Romans chapter 2, we're going to begin at verse 12. There's a reason that I want to do this. In Las Vegas last week, I preached a sermon on unconverted regenerate elect. And I thought about bringing that same sermon here today, but it's Communion Sunday, and it would run long, and I didn't think this would be the right Sunday for it. But I'll give you a little teaser here. In Romans chapter 2, beginning at verse 12, we read, "For as many as have sinned without law shall also perish without law. And as many as have sinned in the law shall be judged by the law. For not the hearers of the law are just before God, but the doers of the law shall be justified." Now, I'll prove this point in that other sermon. I'm just going to make the statement here right now and move on. But there's two major senses in which the word justified is used in the scriptures. There is a sense in which you are justified from the guilt and the penalty of your sins. Justification, if you will. That's one sense. But then there's another sense, and it's found more frequently than the first. And that is where you are shown to be justified. It's an evidence that what you do shows that you are just. Example, God never had to be justified from the guilt and penalty of his sin. And yet the scriptures, time and time and time again, it uses that word where God is justified in this. Well, he didn't have to get justified. He never sinned, but he showed that he was just in the actions that he did. And that's what we're dealing with here. For not the hearers of the law are just before God, but the doers of the law shall be justified. They show that they're justified by keeping the law. You keep the commandments of God and you are showing that you're justified, because that's what justified people do. You don't get justified in that, but you show that you are. Verse 14, "For when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these having not the law are a law unto themselves, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another in the day when God shall judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ according to my gospel." Now, there's something very important in that passage of scripture I'm going to show you in a second. But what we're dealing with here primarily are people that these Gentiles, remember in the Old Testament, the only nation that actually had the law was the nation of Israel. The other nations, all of the Gentiles, they didn't have that. But there were people in every one of those nations that kept the law, even though they didn't have it. And God dealt with them to the limit of the life that they had. You see, a child of God does not have to be told not to lie. You know not to lie. It's in your heart. And you know that when you do lie, oops, I screwed up. So up until the time that you were, up until the time you were converted, think about this. A perfect example of unconverted elect is the Apostle Paul, unconverted regenerate elect. The Apostle Paul tells us in Galatians that he was born again at the same time that he was born. At the moment that he was being born, he was born again. And yet, look at the damage he did until he was converted on Damascus Road. But all that time, he was a regenerate child of God, doing what he thought he ought to be doing. Are you any different? I came to a knowledge of the truth when I was about 34, 33, 34, 35, something like that. And yet, I was probably one of those ones that was born again when I was a kid. So God dealt with me through all of that. I have numerous examples of him answering my prayers long before I ever knew the truth. So, was I a child of God at that point? Yeah, because he doesn't hear him otherwise. And he dealt with me according to what light I had. And that's just like these Gentiles. Now, here's the important point I want you to look at. Verse 13. If your Bible's like mine, at the very beginning of verse 13, what do you got? A parenthesis. And that parenthesis goes all the way down to the end of verse 15. There's a parenthetical statement that runs all the way from the beginning of verse 13 to the end of verse 15. A parenthetical statement does not have to be there for the grammar to make sense. You can yank it, it's given for additional clarification, but it doesn't mean anything relative to the grammar. You can just rip it right out of there and read from verse 12 and jump to verse 16. Let's do that. For as many as have sinned without law shall also perish without law, and as many as have sinned in the law shall be judged by the law in the day when God shall judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ according to my gospel. So when you're judged, if you don't know, if you don't have the law, then you're not judged according to what you would expect to be. But you are judged according to what you got. The light that you have, whatever light you've got, you better keep it. Okay? So that's how God deals with those that don't hear the gospel. There are people that will live in this world and will never hear the gospel, but they're God's children, and God deals with them according to what they do have, not according to what they don't. In Hebrews chapter 3, let's look at the regenerate that do hear the gospel, but then reject it. And there's a bunch of them. Let's see how God deals with them. Hebrews chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. Wherefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling. All right, clearly this does not say, wherefore lost, dead, alien sinners. No, it says holy brethren. This is talking to saved people, right? This is talking to God's children. Wherefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our profession, Jesus Christ, who was faithful to him that appointed him, as also Moses was faithful in all his house. For this man was counted worthy of more glory than Moses, inasmuch as he who hath builded the house hath more honor than the house. For every house is builded by some man, but he that built all things is God. Now I want you to, I'm sorry, we got to keep going. But Christ is a son over his own house, whose house we are, if we hold fast the confidence and the rejoicing of the hope firm unto the end. Wherefore, as the Holy Ghost saith, today if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts, as in the provocation in the day of temptation in the wilderness, when your fathers tempted me, proved me, and saw my works 40 years. Wherefore I was grieved with that generation, and said, they do always err in their heart, and they have not known my ways. So I swear in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. Now think about something for a moment. This is another one, I'm not going to prove it this morning, I'll prove it another time, but all of those children that came out of the wilderness, that walked through the Red Sea and wandered, they were all children of God. That whole clan, they were all God's children, and yet they didn't believe him. The gospel was preached to them the same way it was to us. They didn't believe him. And so they never entered into Canaan. They never entered into the promised land. They never got to rest. They had to keep working. You think about, what is this rest that you enter into? What do most churches make you do your entire life? Run like a hamster on one of them little, you ever watched a hamster run on one of those wheels? They can't get anywhere, but they run and 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 run. Can't take a break, can't move, just keep running. That's what most churches do to folks. They make you work and work and work and work and work and work. I was listening to a video the other day and had John MacArthur on there, and that guy's a lot more twisted than I thought he was. Because there are preachers now that preach to people in the churches that tell most of them that they're lost because you're not working hard enough. We got you running like a trained monkey, but you're not running fast enough. That's what, you don't get a break. You see, if you believe God's truth, you realize, I don't have to do that anymore. And that's God's rest. That's the rest that you can enter into if you believe the gospel. But if you don't believe it, you're going to just keep running and running and running, and it doesn't matter what flavor you're going to run. It can be Presbyterian, it can be Buddhist, it can be Hindu, it can be any false religion. You're going to run and run and run and run and run and never get a break and never get any rest. And God's children, if you believe the truth, you get a break. You get to rest. You get to stop messing with that. But he told them right here that they would not enter in. Take heed, brethren, we're at verse 12. Lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. But exhort one another daily while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. For we are made partakers of Christ if we hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast unto the end, while it is said, today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts, as in the provocation. For some, when they heard, did provoke, howbeit not all that came out of Egypt by Moses, but with whom he was grieved, 40 years. Was it not with them that had sinned, whose carcasses fell in the wilderness, and to whom sware he that they should not enter into his rest, but to them that believed not? So we see that they could not enter in. because of unbelief. Let us therefore fear, lest a promise being left us of entering into his rest, any of you should seem to come short of it. For unto us was the gospel preached as well as unto them. But the word preached did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. For when we have believed, for we which have believed do enter into rest. As he said, as I have sworn in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest, although the works were finished from the foundation of the world. The thing that gets you into heaven was taken care of before this world was ever even created. And yet most religion wants you to just keep working and working and working, something that's been done for millennium. So it's already in the past, but they just want to keep you on the treadmill, keep you running. For he spake in a certain place of the seventh day on this wise, and God did rest the seventh day from all his works. Now, you may not, your physical self may not have been regenerated before the foundation of the world. You weren't here. And the price hadn't been paid in full yet before the foundation of the world, because Christ hadn't been born yet. But in God's mind's eye, you need to understand that he sees things differently than we do. He sees the end. And everything that's going to happen from the beginning to the end has already happened to him. And he's already known what it is. And he's known for eternity what it is. He doesn't have to learn anything. He already knows. So he's looking at it from a different perspective. All that stuff was done before he even created the world. And yet most religion doesn't want, they want to keep you out there working. It's finished already. If you're one of God's children, that price is already paid. And in this place again, if they shall enter into my rest, seeing therefore it remaineth that some must enter therein, and they to whom it was first preached entered not in because of unbelief. Again, he limiteth a certain day, saying in David, today, after so long a time, as it is said, today if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts. He said it in Moses. He said it again in David. Paul's saying it here. For if Jesus had given them rest, then would he not afterward have spoken another day? There remaineth therefore a rest to the people of God. For he that is entered into his rest, he also hath ceased from his own works, as God did from his. Let us labor, therefore, to enter into that rest, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't serve God, but we certainly don't look at it from a standpoint that I got to do this to get into heaven, because that was already done. What I do now, the service I do to God now, is to show God, is to basically say thank you. And the amount of service that I do for God is proportionate to how important that redemption is to me. Now, I know I'm not going to finish the outline this morning. We're just going to go ahead and finish it right here, because I've run right up on the clock. But and this feels like a good place to stop. I remember one time I preached a sermon. I think they called it the toolbox sermon, and I got to the toolbox part and I finished it, and then I just kept going on with my outline. Finally closed out the service, and Conrad pulled me aside afterwards and he said, "You should have stopped at the toolbox. You had them right where you wanted them at the toolbox. That's where you should have quit." So this feels like a good place to jump off. So for this morning, I thank you for your very kind and patient attention, and let's stand and be dismissed in prayer.